Welcome to ABA on Tap, where our goal is to find the best recipe to brew the smoothest, coldest, and best tasting ABA around. I'm Dan Lowry with Mike Rubio, and join us on our journey as we look back into the ingredients to form the best concoction of ABA on tap. In this podcast, we will talk about the history of the ABA brew, how much to consume to achieve the optimum buzz while not getting too drunk, and the recommended pairings to bring to the table. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and always analyze responsibly.
All right, and welcome back to ABA on Tap. I am your co-host, Mike Rubio, and welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Michelle Zeman. Enjoy.
We were talking about...
Catch your train of thought. We got time.
The kind of miscommunication, or the chasm might be a little bit of a strong word. The difference in communication between the ABA field and the people that we're serving and the medical industry, and how that's just been a challenge. I think it's been since 2013 in California. Basically, ABA has been funded by medical insurance, and now we've had to learn to speak their language. To be fair, they've had to try to learn to speak our language, and I don't know, we need some Rosetta Stone or something. Like, we're not speaking the same languages. So that problem we could spend hours talking about, but I think that problem is very well understood. What are your solutions? And I think one of them you mentioned was having neurodiverse individuals actually speak to insurances, but what are your solutions to that problem?
I think the solutions to the problem, do root in, that collaboration, but then also too, getting and this sounds so basic, but getting feedback, feedback from our consumers, feedback from our clients, we sit here and we talk about how this assessment tool, according to this assessment, you should be doing these particular things. And it's like, but what if that's not what they need right now? What if this is something that, we might say they need, but they don't actually need right now? Or maybe that's something that they won't necessarily achieve, not because they can't do it, but because they don't want to do it. What if it's not socially significant to them? And so I think the solution is just really listening to feedback, listening to our consumers, listening to the people who are supposed to benefit from our services, and actually be able to see how we can best work, on the skills that they find are socially significant for them, right? But then also too, when we're thinking about behaviors and how we can shape behavior, how we can help them get to where they want to be, we need to be collaborative in that sense. We do need to spend more time, listening and having these types of conversations. And even if our clients aren't necessarily as articulate as me, being able to talk about these things, they can show us different things that help them feel like they actually matter in their care. I really think that it does take just having those conversations and listening to those conversations and really being mindful of the service that we are ultimately providing, because we aren't just coming in and shaping behaviors. We're changing lives at the end of the day. So we're promoting skills that are helping them change lives.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Interesting. I couldn't agree more. Now, with the next step of my question with that would be, so you're saying not just because an assessment shows that an individual might need to work on that goal, and we spent yesterday doing a program design.
You're reading my mind.
Talking about that. We could spend forever talking about that as well. I agree wholeheartedly with that. The medical field, I think a lot of times has been very concrete in terms of, we need this, imaging or whatever. We need to have this result, and then we're done working on this, whether it's diabetes, cancer, a broken arm. It is healed when this has happened. My question to you, or my thought is that I remember being on a panel where we were working with Cigna at the time, or about to work with Cigna at the time, and they were like, well, what is your metric for successful ABA? And that was a really challenging question, because there are various metrics that we could have. One could be the client feeling, just self-report. But there's self-report is a very challenging way to come up with a metric. Another one is standardized assessments, which now is more standardized and more quantitative, but now runs the issue of now we are trying to standardize something which has a huge level of diversity, and we're basing our therapies around the assessment. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of like quantifying the success of ABA in a way that can be individualized, but also not so subjective and abused to where the insurance company would be like, because theoretically you could do ABA forever. What are your thoughts on that? Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, it does, and it's a very challenging question that I feel like, can have a lot of different answers. I think I'll take it back to when I was a child. I wasn't in ABA for very long because of just because of a few circumstances. I know, like with the coach that my mom worked with, she was only around for about 6 months, and she was only around for about 6 months because of the fact that she was coming up all the way from Fort Lauderdale once a quarter. Got to mention that too. She was coming up from Fort Lauderdale all the way up to Sarasota at the time, which, by the way, if geography, it's, I think, like a 4 or 5 hour drive, if I remember correctly. It's pretty far. Yeah. But the fact is they would come in and work. And the thing is, I think, we can sit here and we can say, okay, this person, they report that they are doing better, and they have attributed these things to being able to make meaningful relationships. Like, what are some things that they can self-report, and their overall happiness, their overall quality of life has gotten better, and that's where it's like we look at standardized assessments, and we want to look at, okay, like, what skills have they mastered out of? I remember one BCBA who was like, I'm ready to discharge this particular client because they have mastered out of everything in the PB map. And it's like, that is not an indicator that you should discharge a client. No. What needs to happen is, like, what can we do to, basically we need to look at, okay, there's a few different factors. We need to look at their quality of life. We need to look at, especially like when it comes to our clients who are not 18, we also need to talk to parents too, because parental involvement is huge. Of course, like, we want to make sure that our families are aware of what's going on too, kind of how we can help them. But then also too, looking at, like, yes, we might need a standardized assessment just so that way we can say, like, okay, like, they met these certain milestones. But I think, honestly, quality of life really does matter here. I think at the end of the day, if they are reporting that, or if there's some sort of indication that, things are going better in their personal life, with their ability to communicate, their ability to, be safe in multiple environments, to be able to acquire new skills, to be able to take the skills that they have and generalize them across multiple settings, multiple partners, multiple circumstances. If there is some sort of quality measure to do that, then that's something that's worth noting.
That's wow. I really, especially you talked about like the quality of maintaining friendships and things like that. That there's certainly a way that you can measure that. You mentioned happiness earlier as well, and I remember talking to you about, like, can we just run a program on like emissions of happiness? Like, that would be such a cool behavior and a cool metric. We're sure measuring protest, and we're sure measuring tantrum, but we're not measuring happiness. So that's awesome, because I'm going to speak a little blasphemy for a second on the insurance side. I'm going to take that back slightly for 1 second. That you mentioned something a little bit earlier, Michelle, about, private equity and ABA being built around getting a lot of hours. And I can speak from experience and also knowing a lot of people and companies that do this. If there's a more open-ended metric of being able to provide services, there will be ABA companies that will provide 30 hours a week of services forever, just to, for the betterment of the company, for the financial feasibility.
We do it to ourselves, you're saying.
Of the company. And they will force families to say that you can only come to this company if you can do 25 or 20 or 30 hours of services. So in some ways, I can see why there does need to be some metric or quantitative way of saying the service needs to fade. On the other side, it's hard to try to individualize something that is standardized.
I think you said it best, Michelle, the idea that, okay, we've got a Vineland, which is a commonly used scale. not every 0 or 1 becomes a goal. You have to see where those things are relevant. Not every 0 or 1 can you draw a straight line through to make a goal. A lot of those things should be collapsed across one another in order to promote more generality, in order to sort of promote more of a holistic approach to learning. So I think that's the important part. And I appreciate the balance we struck here. I'll say it. It's really easy to pick on insurance companies. So I appreciate that Dan actually has their back a little bit here. And it also teaches us. We do a lot of these things to ourselves, to Dan's point. We got to be cautious. The notion that you're telling somebody, no, you can't come to our clinic unless you do 5 days a week, 5 hours a day, 25 hours a week on the phone. You haven't even seen the child or the family. With all due respect to anybody out there, I take issue with that. You might have your reasons for doing that. Please feel free to reach out, abaontap@gmail. Come on the show and talk to us about it, because I'd love to learn how you justify that. I really would.
Any thoughts, Michelle?
I would love to hear about that too.
We'll invite you on. When we get those people on, we'll call you in. Yeah.
Because honestly, I've worked at companies like that before too, and it's like, why do you want this standard? And I know it comes from dollars, but still, it's like, you want to talk about having these key performance indicators of, this child, in every single child that we work with, that's early intervention, they need to be in our services 20 to 30 hours a week. And if they can't meet that specific requirement, then no, they shouldn't be a client. Do you know how much of a disservice you're doing to the family? Do you know how much of an injustice you're doing to the client, the potential client? Just because
I don't know if
someone
they
is
care.
not available. Yeah, exactly. Honestly, they probably don't, because all they care about is dollars.
Well,
that's what clients are.
It becomes a predictable flow, right? If you know that all your clients are signed up for 5 days a week, 5 hours per day, now your predictions in terms of your fiscal flow are much easier. And I'm not defending it, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. And I think that's what those individuals would say. Well, or actually worse, they would say, well, the research says that 25 hours a week. Oh. Any thoughts on that?
I have heard that before. I actually went on a Facebook group one time and was like, hey, I am having a little bit of trouble because I want to be able to write like a rationale as to why my client can't receive their recommendation. I believe this client was recommended for at least 20 hours a week, but they were only available for like 8 or 9. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to discharge them because they're only available for 8 or 9 hours a week. And there are some BCBAs who are like, oh, well, you shouldn't be servicing them because of that. And if you call yourself a compassionate BCBA because you feel like you can service them with that with their availability, then you're not truly compassionate. No, if you're sitting there as a BCBA and saying only 20 plus hours, 25 plus hours a week is what is going to help them be successful, and that's how you feel, you're not compassionate. Hot take there, because
Agreed.
of the fact that, because believe it or not, children have busy schedules. Children do go to school. Children do have bedtime routines. And, some of our clients join after school clubs, which, by the way, cannot encourage more. Please go join a social club. Please do something that is of interest to you. Don't just come to us because, you feel like, when you've been given this diagnosis, or when your child has been given this diagnosis, ABA typically is like the first stop that you might look at. And, the thing is, like, I actually just did an initial assessment with a client who graduated, and it's like, and I did it and the reason why we reassessed was, number one, to kind of check in, but then number two, it was to see, okay, like, how large are these concerns? They've maintained the skills. They don't need us. They need a less restrictive service, like a counseling service. And honestly, one of the recommendations I wrote in was join a club that is of interest to you. Do some social skills that are of interest. Work with the school a little bit more, and it's because they don't need that intrusive level of ABA. So if you're going to sit there and say, oh, well, you're saying that they need 20 plus hours a week, but they're only available for 8. Sorry, you shouldn't be servicing them.
What if you do the 8 hours teaching the parent, and then the parent can do the rest of the hours?
That's the answer, right?
Exactly.
Michelle's living proof of that answer right there. You're living proof of that answer. You only had access to a certain amount of time, and then the service said, we can't do it directly. We're going to teach the parent more so that they can carry this forth? And that is the answer here. But we all know that the business model doesn't necessarily translate that well for that.
Yeah.
I want to talk really quickly about the idea of social skills, and it's something that I've been trying to understand better. There's an underlying assumption that every individual we work with is going to benefit or otherwise enjoy from some level of social interaction. Is there ever a situation where that doesn't hold true, in your opinion? Or is that one of those situations where maybe, us neurotypicals are driving this force because, of course, you have to have friends and it's important to have friends. And a lot of what I hear you saying is telling me, no, that's actually the choice of the individual as well. And as different or as odd, I'll say that, as it might seem for one of us to consider the idea of isolation being bliss, I'm guessing that's a distinct possibility.
That is a distinct possibility. And I actually kind of laughed when you said that, because I myself am not very social outside of ABA. Outside of I have my Instagram and I interact with people on Instagram. I've done my podcasts and stuff. I've done, my job and whatnot. But outside of ABA, I am with my dogs. I'm with my 3 pugs and my 2 boarders, my current 2 boarders right now. And I am in heaven.
Well, that's because we can all agree dogs are better than people. But go ahead.
True. Exactly. Pugs are better than people. That's what I came on here to say. No, but in all seriousness, when it comes to, the social group and social skills and stuff, yes, I do have some clients that are in social skills groups because they want that friendship. It's not because they don't, or they feel like they have to have this. No, they want that friendship. They have shown signs that they want to interact. Now, do I think that social skills groups could do better in terms of teaching certain skills? Absolutely. We're so stuck on teaching these neurotypical style.
Hi, how are you?
Behavior.
I'm doing fine. How are you? Sorry.
Let's introduce this social script, and you're gonna do this. You're gonna.
If I put it all in visuals, it'll make more sense to you, right? And immediately you'll enjoy your. I'm glad I'm hitting a nerve here.
Yes, it's so bad. It's so bad. But the thing is, when it comes to happiness can come from anything. And if a person doesn't want to make a friend, if somebody feels better just being alone and kind of doing their own thing, who am I as a person to judge, that person's lifestyle? I may not necessarily find myself being happy doing what they're doing, but they're happy. And if they're happy, then you need to take your bias, which, by the way, is part of the ethics code for us BCBAs out there. We need to take our bias out of the equation and look at what they want to do as opposed to what we want them to do.
I'll share a recent success or something that I felt pretty good about that is still in development with a client who I've known for quite a while. And, we can say that they've sort of faded back into social groups and, once, twice a week kind of thing. And we had some staffing changes and we had some new staff come in and, they were doing their best, good intent, and really trying to take the goals I had written to promote social interaction with same age peers. And again, running them in a very linear, very restrictive way, to say it that way. That I'm not going to get off of you until you do this, or I'm sort of forcing the idea of reinforcement based on the emission of this behavior. And that immediately made me think, I don't think that's the point here, because we can't contrive the enjoyment of a social interaction. There's no way to contrive that. And yes, maybe you can argue that if we can, to use these words, force feed somebody that interaction, they might go, oh, wait, this tastes better than I thought. But again, I don't think so. So I took that staff and I said, you know what, pull back a little bit. All I want you to do is have this child reference their environment in terms of the opportunities that might be available to interact. And I actually want you to count how many times you do that. I don't care how many times he takes you on that. Just count those for a little while. And then after that, it was like, hey, you're doing it enough. Now, what I want you to watch for is any instance of him then taking you up on that reference and going over to initiate interaction or receiving an overture from a peer, and then that's when you jump in to try and reinforce. And reinforce doesn't necessarily mean good job. What it means is, are there other stimuli in the environment that might enhance their play, what they're about to do? And then when that happens, you do your best and you step back and you facilitate and you let it go. And I was very happy to see that the amount of interactions the child is having have increased. They're by no means at a level that, from a neurotypical perspective, I might say, okay, now we're okay. Now he's interacting sufficiently. And again, that doesn't matter, because now I can see that he's enjoying those interactions. He's choosing to initiate or receive them, and then he does it at a level that seems to be satisfactory. Now, the bigger question is now, will the parents agree with that in terms of a discharge, or what does that look like outside of that group? So there's still much more to explore, but I wanted to share that just because you were very affirming with what you were saying. It made me think of that example, and I want to pat myself on the back a little bit. Feel good about that.
Yes, that was good. That's good.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question for you. So you bring up biases, which are super important all across the spectrum. You being an individual that received ABA and is neurodivergent yourself, have you ever find it difficult to? So certainly gives you a different perspective and a more useful perspective than Mike or myself that may not have that diagnosis and might not be able to put ourselves into the client's shoes. Have you ever found it difficult to step out of your own shoes into their experience, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I feel like that's a challenge just in of itself, just based on the fact that I'm my own experience. I have my own experience. I've talked to family members and families about being autistic, and some of them have looked to me and say, "I want my child to be you," and I'm like, "No, don't wish that." Because here's the thing that's really sweet. I know that comes from a place of love, but remember, your child is great for who they are. And my experience is my own. What I want you to know is that just because your child is going through ABA, and just because your child is autistic, and just because your child has these things that are going on, doesn't mean that they're any less, and that being said, yeah, there are times where it does get a little bit difficult. There are times where I'm like, well, I learned it like this when I went through ABA, and when I was getting some of the help from the sitters that I had back then. And I've always looked at that, and I've been like, okay, now it's time for me to humble myself a little bit and realize, okay, again, this is their way of learning. I need to adapt my way of teaching to help them learn in a way that is successful for them. But also, again, if there's a skill that just is not socially significant for them that I have put in their program, then perhaps I need to reevaluate my program and really try to see what I'm missing and how I can help them, be the happy and successful person that I know that they can be.
That's got to be flattering when somebody, I mean, and in some ways it has to be flattering when they say, I want my kid to be like you. That has to be a little bit flattering, though. It just shows, how...
It's sweet. It's sweet, but also it's like, no.
So I think what that speaks to is kind of like the prototypical idea that we have for people in society, meaning they will go to college, they will be able to support themselves, and you've successfully, graduated college, had an advanced degree, you have a podcast. Those are metrics that, a lot of people look for. Okay, this person is successful, and that's what makes sense to them. But I think kind of what you're saying is, I want your child to grow up to be like me if they can achieve my level of happiness, assuming that you have a high level of happiness. I don't know you very well. Maybe you do or don't. If you don't, you're masking it very well because you appear to have a very high level of happiness.
Very cheerful.
But at the end of the day, that's kind of our goal, right? Yeah. Is how can we help this person get to a level in their life that they can achieve a substantial level of happiness and enjoyment?
That's such a quandary, I think, for parents, because again, I do think it's meant in flattery. It's meant in saying, "Oh, my child has autism. I was very nervous about this diagnosis, but I can see you, Michelle, and clearly there's a great deal of normalization that you've achieved." And that's where I think you're coming in and saying, "Well, okay, hold on. You want to be careful with that because your child may not end up doing what I do." But it doesn't mean that we're not going to seek some level of fulfillment for them in their lives, whatever that looks like. Again, I think
Yeah,
this is sort of a theme that has come up during our conversation without us being planful about it. But I think it's a really important part of our conversation today, and kind of looking at that idea of neurodivergence, that idea of an assent-based approach, the idea of not being so linear in terms of deficits, but looking more at quality of life. So really, really important, interesting theme that we've woven through our conversation today.
And it even goes back to what you were saying, right?
absolutely.
There's spectrums of everything. My girlfriend's
Absolutely.
much more introverted than I am. Her idea of happiness is being on the couch, being able to be on her phone with nobody bothering her. Like that's her, and she'll go out and do stuff like, but that takes energy away from her. That doesn't fill her bucket. Where me, I tend to be more outgoing. Or some families, if you're not a doctor, like you need to grow up and you need to be a doctor or a lawyer and you need to make a bunch of money. And their idea of happiness is accumulating a lot of currency and clout. But everybody has different levels of happiness. And when we start attributing our currency or our metric onto other people, that can be, I wouldn't say abusive. It certainly can lead to being abusive, but it can be dangerous.
It's interesting because
Yeah.
I think I certainly get seen as being very social, and I love interacting and hanging out with people. At the end of the day, though, at home with my family, maybe out for dinner with one friend. I'm not a crowd person. I don't do well in crowds. I don't think people would ever know that unless I admit it, because I can function.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I don't like loud parties. I do like concerts because of the music, right? So that's interesting. But yeah, I'm the same. I mean, I know how to socialize, and at the end of the day, it's not necessarily something I have to do to feel fulfilled. So a spectrum to
Right.
everything, certainly.
Anything you wanted to
That's
say?
why I feel
Okay, please.
like, yeah, I was gonna say that's why quality of life and those types of indicators really do matter. Like, you mentioned that you like concerts. I love concerts. And I know personally speaking, when I go, one of my favorite things to do outside is, be able to go to drag shows. I love the environment of a drag show where it is a little bit loud, it is a little bit crowded. And granted, I don't always like going to crowded places. It really does depend on the company. It does depend on the intent of the crowd. Like, are they going for a concert? Are they going for, a specific service? Like, what exactly are they doing?
Mm,
And for me, that's something that makes me happy. It's something that, does bring me a level of fulfillment. So we have to look at quality of life then in order for us to truly be as like, I guess, I'm trying to think of the word. I guess we need to look at quality of life to be as individualized as we can be as
mm,
providers.
mm.
I have a couple more questions, but
Go.
before, okay.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said earlier in your introduction. So you mentioned that you worked in the residential facility and then you moved within the residential facility to the ABA clinic. Is that correct? So
Yeah, I work. Yep.
can you speak to the difference? Was it different clients? Because ABA is kind of going on wherever. So was it different clients or did the same clients go to the clinic and then go back? What was the differentiation there?
So the differentiation was we had some clients who were in residential that went to ABA. Some of them were full time, and some of them were like only there for a part of the time. It was really dependent on the recommendation of the client. But then we also had some clients who did not live in the residential like service, and actually came in and treated us more as like an outpatient clinic.
Mm,
So yeah, so it was a combination of both. I remember when I first started working at that particular clinic, I had a client that we would quote unquote pick up at the beginning of the day, and we would actually like go to their unit because our ABA clinic was on this campus. So we would go from our campus, walk over to their unit, which was, I want to say, like a 5-minute walk. We would go onto their unit, we would pick them up, meaning like we would walk with them to our clinic. We would practice the transition, and then from there we started the service. So we had that. And then, of course, we had some clients who were dropped off by their families. So, yeah, it was a combination of the two.
And when you say go to ABA, so I understand like the physical transition of like walking, but what did ABA consist of when they went to ABA? What did they do there?
So it really depended on the client. The client that I worked with that lived on there was actually a couple clients that I worked with, but there was one who was very, um, very like profound in his disability. I guess profound is like the word I can think of at the moment. He had no level of communication. We were literally using picture exchange, and our picture exchange system was not in the traditional sense of PECs. Like we weren't following the PECs phases at
Mike
all.
loves pecs.
I would say.
Sorry.
We were not following the PECs.
Inside joke.
I'm going to have to explain that. Sorry for Dan's interruption. Continue, please, Michelle.
All good. So we were teaching this client how to pick up a picture and give it over to us. But then we found out, he was also able to sign candy in sign language. So he could do like the sign, and we would give him candy. And this was also a client who not only had autism, but I don't know if this actually was a diagnosis of his, but if you've ever heard of Prader-Willi syndrome.
I had a client
Sure.
that had that.
So he exhibited what someone with Prader-Willi has. I don't know if he actually had Prader-Willi, but that being said, he would actually like try to get our food, like try to steal from us because of the fact that like we would have access to it.
Insatiable
he would, like,
hunger.
Climb over us. Climb over us. So we worked on a lot of like for him, it was communication. We worked on some one-step directions. We worked on some gross motor. And at the time, this was when I first started out as an ABA like therapist.
Okay.
And so we were just building like very small foundational skills, very small skills. We would reinforce his attempts at communication. We worked on toileting skills with this client. This client was 15 at the time. We also worked on a lot of behavior reduction, which I remember my 4th day with him, he was climbing up the toilet and hitting the ceiling. And I remember being so overwhelmed. Yeah, I was, oh my gosh.
That
my
sounds
4th
overwhelming.
day, I feel like, yeah, it was rough. My 4th day of ABA, I'm like panicking. And I guess like one of the supervisors, and it was actually his supervisor, that heard me, and she's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. She goes, "Well, you're like practically yelling." And like, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not okay, And so then I learned at that point I need to take a step back. But it was also, it was so interesting because like with him, we were starting off very, very basic skills, very basic communication, very like, I hate to say like beginner skills, but that's kind of like where we started at, because nobody had really taken the time to like teach him how to communicate, teach him how to do things that were, that he needed for his daily life. So that was one of the clients. The other client was a little bit younger, and he lived on the campus. And with him, we were working on more communication, and we were working on like toleration of, I think it was toleration of denied access for him, but I don't remember like the exact context. I do remember there would be some behaviors where like we would try to work on just having them transition between activities, and he would start barking at us and trying to bite us. He would turn into a dog, and it's like, oh geez, so, and this was when I started out as a technician. So I'm just like, what am I supposed to do? And at that point, like we really didn't have a whole lot of like support from the supervisors.
Sure.
And so it was really tough. And even like when I would try to make attempts to help this client, the feedback that I would get was more or less like not just corrective, but negative corrective. And it was like, okay, but how am I supposed to do better? How am I supposed to help this client? How am I supposed to do this? If you're going to sit here and tell me everything I'm doing wrong, show me what I need to do to do it right.
Yep.
So
okay.
yeah, definitely something. So, but yeah, no, it was, it's definitely very different. It's, when it comes to ABA in general and the flow of sessions, it's different across all clients, whether it's residential or a client who comes in for outpatient ABA or a client who receives in-home services, but that being said, it was definitely a journey to say the least.
So with that, then you mentioned that you became a clinical director, and you hated it. So I want to ask you about that.
Thank you for going back to that.
Yes. Theoretically,
Yes.
the progression of the typical, if we want to call it, progression of ABA, become an RBT, and then if you like it, you become a BCBA, and then maybe you move up and become a clinical director and run your own business or run your own office, and then you've kind of made it or whatever. You can actually make decisions.
The big
why
bad clinical director.
Yeah. Talk to us about why you said you hated it.
I hated being a clinical director for a lot of different reasons, but the main reason that I can tell you why I hated it was because I felt like I was more of an admin shield rather than like somebody who was working on the clinical things. Yeah.
I knew it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
So, yeah, for sure. So, being someone who really loves ABA and, helping clients and helping technicians grow into hopefully becoming amazing and fantastic BCBAs, I wanted to get into a clinical director position thinking maybe I can do it at this level. Like I could be this person that could still provide, this amazing, like high quality supervision, what I felt was, and, same thing for like my technicians, be able to help them be able to reach the goals that they want to become a BCBA, all of these things. No, that was not it. I've been in a couple different clinical director positions. The first one was I had to basically my first meeting was about how we had to limit our Medicaid supervision to 10% a week. This was Florida Medicaid. And if we were going above 10%, we could actually get in trouble with Florida Medicaid. I had to go into my very first BCBA meeting about that, and that was rough for me to be able to even just say. I still don't understand why this was the case. But that being said, that was one of my first meetings. I also had to talk about, oh, why aren't you meeting your billable hours? Which I hate that question. It's a running theme. It was a running theme when I was a clinical director at that position. And then my most recent clinical director position was the exact same thing. Oh, you're not meeting 30 billable hours a week. What's going on?
My favorite is when they don't have the ability to meet it. They don't have enough clients, but you're still holding them accountable for meeting it. Anyway,
goodness.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Are we going there? Are we going to go there?
No, we're not going to go there because this will be a 9-hour podcast. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Michelle.
Yeah, no, you're good. But that was a conversation that I would have too. It's like, oh, you're not meeting billable hours. And it's like, I would have to do and another thing that I hated about the clinical director position I was in was I was the one having to terminate people. I did not like terminations. I did not like having to give warnings to people. I did not have of course I'm okay with giving like corrective feedback when it's my client and when it's, them working on specific skills with my clients and how I can help them do better with the clients that they're working with, for lack of a better term, do better. But, that being said, I would have to terminate people. And I hated terminating. I literally, so I had to witness a termination with a BCBA. And then for my termination, like when I had to do my first termination, they were like, oh, you got one for free, so now it's your turn. And that's literally the exact quote that this person gave me. And I literally wish I could go back and just have said, you know what, I'm good. I don't want to be a clinical director anymore, because at that point, but I really wanted to be a successful clinical director to these people. And it just turned out that I wasn't that, I would like to say that I'm a really great BCBA because I want to focus on helping my clients reach their level of happiness, their highest quality of life that they can achieve, rather than look at KPIs and how can we help the business? And, and also too, toxic administration does play a very big role. I've worked with quite a few administrative people who are super toxic. And honestly, that has been a main reason why I don't like being a clinical director, is because I have to basically protect the higher ups and I have to protect all the admin people. And I don't agree. Like I wear my emotions on my sleeves. I wear my thoughts on my face. I'm not the most filtered person when it comes to my thoughts and opinions on things. And unfortunately, that can be translated very negatively. And so when I've had certain thoughts and feelings, it's landed me in hot water before. So it's like, okay, you know what? Like, this is not the position for me. I'm a much stronger clinical person. So now I'm in a position, this director of clinical development, where I can still have my caseload. I can go play in the field, which playing in the field is my favorite thing to do. But then I also get to work with people who want to be me. who want to be in a position like mine, who want to become great supervisors, who want to actually work with clients and help them achieve a high level of happiness, a high quality of life. So that's why for me, a clinical director position just isn't it, toxic admin, having to protect people, you're not meeting your billable standards, which I could just literally throw up hearing that.
I started shaking when the first time you said that. It was we're back to the trauma informed care. I was going to need something.
I thought your coffee was wearing off. Okay, that makes
sense.
I
started shaking a little bit. I was like, oh no, don't tell me I forgot to convert a session. No, I've been so busy all week. No, don't beat me, please. Don't whip me. Toxic admin. I'm only going to talk about it for like 5 seconds because we can do a whole episode. It's been my experience outside of very few circumstances in employment that there is this really weird dynamic between admin and, for example, RBTs or BCBAs in terms of a managerial tone that admin wants to take over the clinicians. And in my opinion, of course, I'm biased. I'm partial to clinicians. Hey, who's the horse here and who rides the cart? Please don't whip the horse. Take care of the horse. Block for us. Make sure. So we forgot to convert a session. You know why? Why? Because we're terrible and lazy? No, because we're out working with clients and it's really exhausting. And sorry that now you decided to run your billing and that one entry isn't in and it throws off your whole flow. And again, I'm being a little facetious, but.
But when we're done with this podcast, can you please convert your session from last week?
It's true.
Oh man, it becomes the TPS report from Office Space, right? Did you get the new TPS report? It's like shut up, just shut up, and you know what? No, are you writing to me because it's not converted on there? Well, then clearly I didn't convert it. What? How about just a simple, hey, Mike, when you get a chance, could you convert that? I'm running billing. Thanks a lot, man, for all you do. Oh my God, it would make such a huge difference, but it does everywhere.
What would be better is if they punish you for not doing it. That'll make it way
well,
better.
As behavior analysts, they're not behavior analysts. Anyway, I guess, yeah, punishment. Oh, that's even better, right? Company policies all surrounding punishment. We're behavior analysts, for crying out loud. This is our best response? Really? Like this is our best human resources effort? Wow, okay. Anyway.
We feel you more than you know with that clinical director piece. We both came from a really large company, and then we moved to we actually were able to basically run a company for 8 years that actually had a capitated contract with an insurance company, which was just amazing. So there was no fee for service. There's no justification. And it was amazing. And it's funny because I was a BCABA at the first company. And I would sit in on supervisor meetings, and you made me think about it with the compassionate care. Probably no more than 10%, probably less than 5% was ever spent on clinical compassion, anything clinical.
I think you're being generous with those percentages.
Always, this client has 30 hours, you're only doing 24. How can we get those extra 6? Or this funding service change? Or how can you get your standard? Or hours, efficiency.
Efficiency. Oh, man. Efficiency is the nemesis of compassion.
And you have to spend all of your time justifying the hours, which makes it inefficient because anyway. So then we went to that company, to a different company, which again, back to the case manager meeting, the clinical meetings were never spent discussing anything clinical.
Ever.
So I totally feel you on the admin. That's why I'll speak for myself, but I think I can speak for both. We were like, we got to try our own company because like this.
Yeah.
I can't, we are losing our clinical integrity because we're not talking about anything clinical ever anymore. It's just all about hours and efficiency and billable standards.
And it's not to say we don't understand the importance of efficiency as business owners now, but it can't be what you lead with. You have to lead with what you do, right? What's our product? Our product is ABA-based intervention. We have to make that the best. And then, yes, we have to mind our fiscal health, but it gets so difficult when those two things, are moved around, and suddenly all you're talking about is the money. Back to your term there, Michelle. Money, money, money. Again, understand why it's important, but it's not what we do, right? So, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, for me, when I found out about the position that I'm in now, I honestly don't really have to interact with admin that much. And again, this is just my personal experience. I have never been able to get along with hardly anybody in administration, and not just like, at current companies, but, at companies in the past too, because all they care about is, okay, you are underutilizing 97153. You are underutilizing 97155. Let's see how we can do. I'm like, no,
Well,
like let's not and say we did.
we're going to get you a program. We're going to write you a goal. Michelle will get along with admin on 80% of opportunities across 8 out of 10 sessions, across 3 out of 4 service interventions with generalization. We're going to write you that goal.
And she'll have to do it with 3 different people across 4 different offices to ensure the generality. So we got you. We got you, Michelle.
And
no worry.
That'll make me a humble BCBA.
Yes, that is we will make a humble BCBA out of you if it's the last thing we do, Michelle Zeman.
I have one more thing that is very important that I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak on and ask about. The podcast.
Please.
How did you come about it? Can you talk a little bit about your podcast? Let us know about your podcast, and thank you for coming on ours.
Yeah, of course. So Safe Space, the ABA podcast, it was kind of funny. I actually got a message from Lizna Kamani over at To the Moon ABA. Shout out to her. She reached out to me and was like, hey, I'm looking for a podcast host. And she reached out to me and someone who was previously a host of Safe Space, the ABA podcast, Mackenzie Welch.
Okay.
And, we actually got together. We did an entire episode together on trauma informed. I think it was the first episode where it was the trauma informed behavior analyst. And it was that whole episode. And I just remember we talked about that. We did a whole episode on it, and it was magic. Like at that point, I felt like I was in my element. I really just wanted to continue doing podcasting. And even though Mackenzie's no longer part of that particular podcast, I still have continued on. And it's just been quite a journey for me to be able to talk about ABA and, talk to BCBAs in all different perspectives, because of the fact that, I am one BCBA in a sea of how many BCBAs are there in this day of age? There's a lot of us, and I want to be able to learn from other people from what I didn't learn as, a BCBA, or what I haven't learned as a BCBA, or even before being a BCBA. For me too, I also, when I first started as a BCBA, I had kind of and I hope this person who's listening understands why I feel this way, but I had a really crappy quote unquote mentor who basically was like, and I'm trying to be nice about it, but I'll be completely honest with you guys. But, she came in, she was very punishing as well. She was very much of the school of, oh, well, you're writing this wrong. You're doing this wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be doing that. And it was like, okay, but what am I doing good at? Am I doing good at anything that I'm doing? Or, am I doing anything right? And that being said, there have been weekends where I'll spend 4, 5, 6 hours trying to perfect this one particular thing. And it's at that point when I have a panic attack and I'm trying to perfect this, that's when I'm only doing a quote unquote good job. And so now my interactions with her became very much aversive. And so I had to sort of walk away from that and realize, okay, I need to learn things on my own for a little while. And I did, but now I'm okay, not that I don't want to ever learn things from other people, but I really want to see ABA from multiple perspectives. I have a podcast episode about OBM. That episode was absolutely probably my favorite episode. Shout out to Jake Watson, I believe is his name. And I spoke to him. That was a really great episode. I've talked to some BCBAs who've done feeding. I just recently did a sleep episode. Yeah. Our next episode that's coming out is all about, this person had just became a BCBA. Shout out to Miranda Irwin. She just became a BCBA a few months prior, and she was telling me a little bit about her journey to becoming a BCBA.
Oh, cool.
And for me, I want to learn these types of things. I want to be able to learn from other people's experience and kind of see how I can do better in my own practice, but then how I can also learn from other people of what I should do, what I shouldn't do, what I can do, what maybe is a little outside of my scope of practice, but then at the same time, just be able to collect all of this knowledge to become a more well-rounded behavior analyst. And so for me, I mean, it's been a few years now that I've done this podcast. I want to say it's been like 2-ish years or something now. And it's just been a very wonderful experience, just being able to interview a variety of people that just really have such a wealth of knowledge. It's so great to be able to do that, and on the platform that I'm doing it as well.
Well, that is awesome. We are, again, first of all, so we will link your podcast in our description. But should somebody not see that or be driving and not be able to look at that right now, where can people find your podcast at?
Yeah, so you can find Safe Space, the ABA podcast, on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, and you can also find it on rssfeed.com. If you look up
Cool.
Safe Space, the ABA podcast, it looks like a little spaceship, and you'll see Safe Space, the ABA podcast on there.
Well, we're here to help promote that, and maybe one
Right
day
on.
we'll be able to be a guest on Safe Space. That'd be exciting.
Hint, hint. Wow, Dan.
Yeah.
Not subtle at all, Dan. Wow.
No.
Good for you. Michelle,
Love
this is
it.
a great place to stop. I have 20 more questions at the very least for you, but we've taken plenty of your time, and all it means is you'll have to come back if you would grace
Of
us with your
course.
presence again. I'd like to do a
Would
little
love
wrap up here. So I think the idea here is stay compassionate, right? Take an assent-based approach, and always
Analyze responsibly.
cheers,
Thank you,
Michelle.
Michelle.
Bye-bye. ABA on Tap is recorded live and unfiltered. We're done for today. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. See you next time.